In this lecture, we're going to dig into the idea of the gender binary to get a deep dive into this ideology and consider how maybe we all engage with it on a daily basis, not only in how we present ourselves to others, but also perhaps in how we interpret and make sense of the world around us. So some of the objectives in this section are we're going to define the concept of the gender binary, understand some of the key assumptions associated with it, and then explain how the gender differences are socially constructed. And that means we're all playing a role in maintaining the binary through our action and interpretation of the world around us. So to get started, let's look at this graph. It's drawn from the textbook. It's called Steps Toward Becoming a Man or a Woman in the United States. So it breaks down the different elements that go into what we have come to define and determine as what it means to be male or female within our society. To get started, it looks at some of the biological processes that shape our external physical characteristics. So as you can see, like the first couple of steps are things that are occurring within the womb, right? So like before we're even born, our chromosomal makeup is determined, as are the beginning development of our reproductive organs that oftentimes become externally visible. And so generally at birth, it is externally apparent whether or not someone would be identified as male-bodied or female-bodied. I'll just leave the little asterisk there. We'll come back to this in a minute. After this lecture, you'll see some more content where it doesn't always fit neatly into those categories. But then there's also internal genitalia, right? So there's also aspects of what it means to be male or female bodied that isn't necessarily evident externally. And then we have secondary sex characteristics, and these are developed through the process of puberty, right? Where we see a change in physical characteristics of an individual, and those changes are instigated by the hormones that are pumping through our bodies. So as we can see, most of this list is referring to what maybe biological physical processes we have categorized into different categories, right? Male or female. Although that's a pretty simplistic way to think about the variety of human variation that exists. Okay, but towards the bottom, we see that it's not just about biology when we think about gender, and we broke this down a little bit in chapter 1. It's also the social meaning and associations we make with that biology or those physical characteristics as well. So when we talk about gender identity, we're referring to whether or not someone identifies as male or identifies as female, or as we'll explore, there's multiple identities that don't necessarily fit neatly in those boxes either. But it's a sense of our connection to that physicality that we have and that sense of belonging in one group or another, which may or may not actually match our physical characteristics. Gender expression is more this idea of how closely we attune ourselves and our bodies to what is associated with being masculine or feminine within our society. I wanted to break this down. Again, we're going to keep playing with some of these ideas in the next set of lectures for chapter 2, but I just think it's important to recognize that there is this connection that is assumed and that is the foundation of our understanding of the gender binary. Because the assumption is that one's body, right, which is sort of the first portion of this graph, one's gender identity and one's gender expression will align. And this is really the foundation of what we consider or we would call the gender binary. Because the gender binary says there's kind of two kinds of people. There's male-bodied people who identify as male and they express their gender in a masculine way. Or there's another type of person, and that other type of person is female-bodied, they're female-identified, and they express their gender in a feminine way. And there's a lot of evidence, I think, that this is the standard way and standard ideology through which we have been taught to view what it means to be male, female, masculine, feminine, etc. So here's just a couple of examples, right? Like that classic book we probably all heard from of probably none of us have actually read, right? But we know it almost as like a catchphrase, right? Like men are from Mars, women are from Venus, right? Like we're so different. We must be from different planets, right? There was an ad for Absolute Vodka that says, in an absolute world, we need a man to woman dictionary and a woman to man dictionary, because men and women are just so different, right? They don't even have the same basis of communication. And then there's these ideas that like men and women are just the opposite sex. They are so different from each other, right? It's sort of characterized as being complete opposites. And sort of the ironic thing about it is that while yes, male and female typically developing bodies may end up with some distinctions, but the reality is most of what it means to have a human body is quite similar to each other. And so we focus very specifically on the distinctions, which is a smaller portion of our actual physicality, and maybe our realities in terms of how we think and how we act and what we like, right? But we focus less on the similarities because what we've been taught to focus on and what our culture has reinforced is that we're just oh so different, okay? And so the gender binary actually comes from like the idea of the binary code, and the binary code is that there's literally two opposites. It's a 0 or a 1 in the binary code. So you are one or you are the other. And I really liked this cartoon. So it's like a human is interacting with an alien, and wow, we found extraterrestrial life. And the person who is interacting with the alien says, "So I know I'm supposed to be answering your questions and all, but first, I've got to know, are you a boy or a girl?" And the alien says, "I'm sorry, I don't follow." And what I love about this cartoon is I think it's such a good representation of the reality that the way we try to make sense of the world around us is by putting people into these constructed boxes that we have, right? And so when we meet someone for the first time, oftentimes we attempt to put them into a box, a gender box, right? And that we then have a number of assumptions about that person that's based on which box we think they fit in. So there's a lot of assumptions and there's a lot of stereotypes that then come out and are an effect of these gendered ideologies. So let's take a look at some of the assumptions that flow out of the gender binary ideology. So the first assumption is that gender characteristics are natural or inherent. So if we think back to that graph about like, XY or XX chromosome, testes or ovaries, and then way down at the bottom was masculine or feminine. So one of the assumptions from this gender binary perspective, that you're at one or the other, is that being masculine is a natural outcome of being male, and being feminine is a natural outcome of being a female. And so it's this belief then that all the characteristics we associate with femininity or all the characteristics we associate with masculinity are a direct outcome, are caused by whether or not we are male or female bodied. Another assumption that comes from the gender binary is that men and women are fundamentally different. So even when we think about like heterosexual partnerships, there's this idea that like opposites attract, right? And although that ideology is likely also considered and applicable to same-sex relationships, it really comes from this idea that a man and a woman entering into a heterosexual relationship are just so at their core different from each other, right? That those opposite characteristics create some sense of connection or fulfillment among each other, right? And then we have the idea that men and women have contrasting characteristics. So not only are we different, but those differences are really fundamental to who we are, and they contrast with each other. So if we think that, men are strong, well, then maybe we think women are weak. If we think men are leaders, we think women are really good compromisers, right? And they're better at following. We think men are really detail-oriented and organized, and we think women have a hard time making up their mind, right? So a lot of the stereotypes we associate with being masculine and feminine tend to have these roots in these core differences. And then if we truly believe that there are two types of people, right? Male-bodied, male-identified, and masculine, female-bodied, female-identified, and feminine, we also kind of believe that we can ascertain a lot about someone if we just knew if they were male or female, right? That basic foundation would help us know who they are, because then it's kind of this belief that everyone who's male-bodied fits in one box neatly and everyone who's female-bodied fits in another box neatly as well. So I'll give you a couple examples of this. Dear Google, please stop acting like a girl. Will you please let me complete the whole sentence before you start guessing and suggesting, right? So although it's joking, it's poking at this idea that's the belief system, right? That all women, are interrupting and always trying to second guess or suggest something, right? And then, even when it comes to maybe relationship advice, oftentimes it comes with these ideas that men and women inherently are in some way, act in some way, and that all women or all men naturally fit within a very small and tight box. So I'll read you a little bit of this. When a man is truly interested in you, there will be no need for you to do the pursuing. Men are born to pursue women, right? This idea, it's natural, inherent. They're born to do it. Yes, you can pursue a man if you want to, but in most cases, it's just an obvious sign that he's not into you. It's not natural, right? Again, natural, inherent, for a man to sit back and let the woman do all the work. This also is reinforcing the idea of contrasting characteristics, right? Men are one way, women are another way. For a man who claims to like you and sit back and allow you to do all the calling, texting, dating arrangements, talks about the future, etc., it's pretty obvious where you stand in the man's life. When a man really wants you, you don't have to chase after him like he's some celebrity. You barely has time for a fan. You will be his priority. And so I just think it's interesting that when it comes to ideas about how we're supposed to interact with colleagues, what we're supposed to expect out of a partner, roles we take on in the family unit, there's these ideologies just permeate all of the things, right? I think is really made clear within this quote. All right, and again, the difference is also highlighted by just the very different types of physical things that men and women, boys and girls are supposed to use. So a clear example of that is if you've ever had a bike before, you may or may not have realized that there are girl bikes and there are boy bikes, which seems silly, right? Because humans sit on these contraptions we've created. They move the pedals with their feet, or if they're lucky, they just have an electric motor on it that moves it for them, right? They pedal, they hold on, and they move forward. But if you can see here on the far left, the girl who is, well, I'm making an assumption, but she is expressing as a female. She is on this yellow bike, and you'll see that there's no center bar. So if you compare that to the second child riding the red bike, there's this center bar. And so if we look at a classic difference between a bike that's intended for a girl or a bike that's intended for a boy, which really has the exact same purpose, there's an extra bar on the boy's bike. And actually the idea originally of creating women's bikes was the idea that women wore long dresses and skirts. And so that having that center bar would get in the way, perhaps even be indecent, right? And so have to remove that bar so she can sit comfortably while still wearing a dress. So silly to think, right? A contraption that has the exact same purpose is very different, right? Because of these gender differences and how we're supposed to present ourselves. Then we even have a Bible, and a Bible that is likely containing much of the same information, but there is a God's Little Princess devotional Bible. It's a different color. I mean, it has a lot of ideology embedded in that, a princess. And then we have God's Mighty Warrior devotional Bible, right? We can't even read the same text without it being manipulated to reflect a specific set of gender beliefs, right? And with boys having the Warrior Bible, reinforcing strength. Girls having the Princess Bible, kind of soft and delicate and pretty, right? And then also sort of funny is like Dodge back in the day released a car called La Femme, right? And so has these curvy lines and soft colors. Ironically, I drive a Honda Fit, and I came across some information that in other countries, I've read, and I need to follow up on this more, that the Fit is actually identified as a female car, and I think it's actually marketed as a she in other markets outside of the US, because there are a lot of characteristics about the car that just speak to women. And actually, one I've been told from a car sales agent was that girls like cars that have more drink containers in them, or like places you can put a drink. So it's kind of funny because in my Honda Fit there are 9 places where you can put a drink, and I just think it's so funny, right? Like that's the characteristic I really care about in a car, apparently. I don't know. All right. So when it comes to the binary, right, there's all these assumptions that go into this either or differential. We've been taught to associate with what it means to be male-bodied or female-bodied. But I think it's important to recognize that we are actively manipulating ourselves to fit within these sets of social expectations. So a quote from the text: much of the difference we see is a result of how we adorn, manipulate, use, and alter our bodies, and not the bodies themselves, right? So it's not so much about how our bodies actually look or actually work or actual distinctions between them in their like most natural form, but instead, let's be honest, our bodies are constantly undergoing modifications in order to more closely align with this gender binary ideology. I was just listening to a podcast, one of my guilty pleasure podcasts, and the podcast hosts were talking about getting, eyelash extensions and how good they feel when they have them and how much prettier they feel or whatever. And so it's even kind of funny, right? In simple ways, like actually a lot of times even in cartoon characters, we are able to determine it as a female or a male cartoon character because the female character has eyelashes and the male character doesn't. But it's sort of silly, right? Because we all have eyelashes, and eyelashes serve a really important biological function of keeping junk out of our eyes, which helps to protect our vision, right? And yet, in this binary sense, we almost believe that males have no eyelashes and females have really long eyelashes. But it's because of a manipulation to our body that's created in this distinction, yeah? So let's look at some potential, and I'd love for you to extend this list. So these are just some ideas that I was coming up with, but I think you could probably come up with a lot more on your own, and I'd really encourage you to. Increasingly, you'll see throughout our lectures is this idea of like, let's apply this material. Think about it in your own life. Think about things you do. Think about observations you've made. The more we can apply the material, the deeper understanding we have, and really it'll prepare you much better for things like quizzes and tests in this class, etc. Okay, so let's think of some ways men might manipulate their bodies to more closely fit with this gender binary ideology. So one, men might be more likely to get things like breast reduction surgeries so they can more closely align with like a flat chest ideal we associate with what it means to be a guy. But men might also do other types of surgeries like getting calf implants so that they can fit with the idea that men are larger bodied and fit in ways that women are not supposed to necessarily fit into. Weightlifting is another example, right? So the way that men engage with those New Year's resolutions of getting fit is often not getting fit just so I can be healthy, but it's getting fit so I can have a larger body size, right? And so if we think one of the key distinction ideas in the gender binary is that like men are bigger than women, then we reinforce this greatly by how we choose to work out. Taking supplements or steroids or protein heavy diets are often focused on building more muscle mass and building more mass in general, right? So it just sort of reinforces this gender binary ideology that men have to be bigger than women. And also this is even comes through in the types of clothing choices that men are expected to make within our culture, right? That maybe wearing larger clothing, wearing looser clothing, right, are ways that reinforce sort of a difference. On the other hand, women might be more likely to have things like breast implants or buttocks implants. And so again, this is reinforcing a difference that yes, women tend to develop breast tissue as a result of hormones that become more active during puberty, and yet the size of breasts is manipulated by things like getting implants, wearing push-up bras to accentuate this difference, cardio workouts. So whereas men might be more encouraged, even if they go to a gym and meet with a personal trainer, their goals that are encouraged by the personal trainer for a guy might be getting big, whereas women it's getting toned, but not too toned, right? Or like not too strong because then you'd be too big. And we'll get into this semester why maybe women are encouraged not to gain as much muscle as men are when it comes to their workout routines. But also shaving, right? This idea that it's acceptable for men to have body hair in places all over their body. Let's include like their armpits. Whereas for women, right, there's this cultural expectation in the US that women are supposed to shave their armpits, shave their legs, pluck hair that might grow in different places on their face, or shave their face to align with a set of cultural ideas. Almost to the point where we believe that women just don't have that much hair on their body, but the reality is that's a manipulation of our body to then fit more closely in a set of gender ideologies. And then dieting, right? So the idea that whereas men might be encouraged to take supplements and steroids to get larger, women are expected to maintain a smaller body size by controlling how many calories we eat, right? Or making sure there's a good balance between how many calories we're burning and how many we're eating, etc. So in essence, we go to great lengths to fit into gender categories. And again, like when it comes to shaving, we then create these false ideas about what the true biological differences exist between someone who is male-bodied and female-bodied and the way that our bodies might develop over time, right? Instead, we create these sort of artificial ones. And that doesn't even go into the fact like use of makeup or hair, our personal care regimens that oftentimes also reinforce difference, right? So the idea that men are expected to maintain oftentimes shorter hairstyles, whereas women are supposed to go to great lengths to maintain longer hairstyles, and even in the types, right, of clothing we wear. And so like in the second image that just came up, this is of a model who really breaks the boundaries of the gender binary. And so these are two images of the same model, and you can see just by the way the person is standing, by the way they're wearing even the same coat, by the way they have their hair, it really reflects a different set of embodiment of what it means to be masculine or feminine, right? So the same person can embody these two very different self-presentations that fit within this neat cultural script that we have created. So in the text, it uses the term gender binary glasses, and I really like this idea, and we're going to keep building on it throughout this semester, but this is one you definitely want to highlight because we'll be referring to it and coming back to it. So essentially, if we live in a society or a culture that has this shared interpretation about gender, right, and a shared sense of beliefs and ideologies, then within that shared sense of beliefs and ideologies, we create meaning and we construct our realities, right? It becomes what is the reality within our society. So much so that if you go into most stores, they have a men's department and a women's department that each have really different types of clothing in it. And that's because it's a response to the constructed meanings we've created. Now, in essence, becomes our reality because you walk into a store and you're told which direction to go, and that reflects the expectation of our culture. So the gender binary is a cultural belief system that exists within our society, but we put on gender binary glasses and we learn how to put them on through our socialization process. So as we engage with our families and media and our peers and the school system, we start to develop an understanding of these cultural beliefs associated with gender. And we become so familiar with them, it's almost like we have a set of glasses put on that we don't even realize we're wearing, right? But then everything we see, we interpret through those glasses. I'll give you a silly example of this. I used to have this pair of sunglasses, and they tinted just everything a little bit red. And so my niece, she has kind of like light auburny hair, like it's mostly just sort of brown, but there's a little bit of red hint in it. And I remember one day I was over at their house and we were hanging out, and I'm seeing everything through my rose-colored glasses, essentially, right? And then I stare at my niece's hair. I'm like, oh my goodness, I never noticed how red her hair is before. And my sister-in-law was like, it's not that red. And I pulled up my glasses and I was like, oh yeah, you're right. It was just the glasses. But I'd been wearing my sunglasses for so long, I didn't even realize it was actually tainting everything I was looking at, right? And so imagine if we come to put on these glasses that tell us this is the male category, this is the female category, it's really hard to see outside of that, right? Or even to recognize we're wearing those glasses, and those glasses color the way we see our reality. Now, wearing those gender binary glasses also comes with a benefit, because if most people within our culture agree with and follow the binary, and like in the text it refers to about 90% of us kind of fit somewhere within this binary, not as neatly as it's presented, but we oftentimes manipulate ourselves and follow ideologies associated with the binary, then it makes us culturally competent when we can make sense of and respond to the way that our culture is constructed. So there's actually some benefit to having a clear understanding of how gender operates within our society, and then, responding appropriately to those sets of cultural expectations. And when we follow the cultural expectations, other people know how to respond to us, right? Because it lets us fit neatly within this set of ideologies. Now, the funky thing about this idea of gender and the binary is how complicated it is and how much we engage with it without realizing it. So if gender is socially constructed, if it's not like a reality, but instead it's a created reality based on shared understanding and shared sets of beliefs and us acting on those beliefs, we really make it complicated. So here's a quick example. Like we associate animals, like some animals we associate as male and some animals we associate as female. So a trite example is like we see dogs as male and we see cats as female, right? And yet it's kind of funny because depending on like what breed of dog, we may see it as more or less male, right? So like, whereas in the book it uses the example like of like a standard poodle, we think of as like typically a male dog, right? But then if you have a like little toy poodle, we think of that as like more feminine, right? And I think it's kind of funny, like if someone has, I don't know, a pit bull, but it's female and it has like a pink collar on it, and people are like, wait, but that's like a pit bull, right? Pit bulls are like super masculine, right? So we like subdivide even the category of dogs, linking them with being male, and then subdividing, well, it kind of depends what breed and what size and what their, texture of their fur is like and whatnot. So some nuanced ways we sort of deconstruct and create these complicated categories is like emotions. So we assume that women are emotional and men are not emotional, but it's kind of funny because we also give guys the pass on being angry, and we expect like anger to be sort of an appropriate emotion for guys, right? So it's like, well, women are emotional, men aren't, but men kind of are. It's just they're only allowed these certain types of emotions and not these other ones, right? So it's like subdivided and nuanced. Or, for example, we think of males more as like musicians, especially like when it comes to playing the guitar, right? We think of it as kind of like a masculine thing to do. And yet when women play guitars, they might be more likely to play like acoustic guitars, and then that's kind of okay, but then we definitely associate males with more like electric guitars, right? So we subdivide down even these ideas of what it means to fit within these gender categories to fit the complexity of the way gender is recognized and embodied within our society. The other interesting thing about the social construction of gender is that so much of it occurs without us realizing it. So remember in the last slide we talked about those gender binary glasses. glasses. Essentially, we put on these glasses and then they shape the way we perceive the world around us. So as we know more about like the way our brains work, a lot of research has gone into the idea of associative memory. And associative memory is this idea that like our brains become trained to make connections, and they make these connections without us being consciously aware of them. So we might automatically place that pit bull into the, oh, that must be a boy dog, right? And then we see a cuddly furry cat and we think, oh, that must be a girl, right? So like we've created these like lines between male, female, masculine, feminine, and we have almost been trained to put things in it, and our brain automatically is making those connections. Here's a simple explanation of the idea of associative memory that I think of is like driving a car. If you have driven a car in the past, maybe, or you do, on a daily basis, maybe you remember the first time you ever got behind the wheel. And I remember when I first started driving, I don't know, I was really scared. So I think I was like 17 when I really got my permit and started driving a lot. And when I started driving, I was so aware of everything. I was looking for every stop sign, looking at where the line was on the road in front of me to make sure that I was stopping in the right place. I was counting the seconds before I started again. I was looking in my mirrors all the time. But I get into a car now and I kind of start driving and I don't think about my mirrors, but I'm still checking them. I stop at stop signs without really thinking about it because my brain has already become hardwired to make those connections, and it does it without me even having to really think about it. And so essentially, if we live in a society that places such a high value on gender, our brains have become trained, and we do it without even thinking about it. We see a dress and we think must be a woman. We see short hair and we put it in a male or masculine category. We see someone being emotional and we think that's pretty feminine, right? Because our brains have been trained in response to the culture that we live in and the belief systems and expected behaviors within that culture, right? So I'm going to give a link and we're going to explore this idea of like these unconscious biases we have. There's IAT tests that have been, thoroughly developed and sort of checked out through Harvard University, which has piloted a lot of the work in this. And we have associative memory with a lot of things, not just gender, but also like religion or with race, with, lots of different things. Those are just a few examples off the top of my head. And so when we think about gender, it's interesting to think what automatic connections we already make between gender and certain sets of actions that we might do or belief systems. Okay, and then the final thing I just want to say is not only do we do this associative memory thing where we've created in our mind these associations and we automatically make these associations without even actively processing the information, but research also shows that we tend to remember data that confirms stereotypes, and we're less likely to remember data that challenges stereotypes. So if we have sets of beliefs about how men are supposed to be or how women are supposed to be within our society, when we're presented, let's say we see a commercial, and in that commercial there's something that contradicts what we expect men are supposed to do, we are less likely to actually remember that information than if we are watching a commercial where it's a female typical activity and we see a female doing it. We're more likely to remember that which confirms stereotypes and not remember as much the things that don't confirm stereotypes. So there's definitely some more data on this that is explored in the book. I highly recommend. And then this graph is a little bit old. It's from 1984, but it also sort of reflects the same idea. How much of a memory do we have of things that are congruent or consistent with our expectations? So in the top half, you can see most of the percentages of memories are like between 70 and 90% when things are congruent with our cultural expectations. But when it goes down to that incongruent messages, our memory really starts to fail us, right? From like 40 to maybe up to 80%, 70%. Are we actually remembering those ads that don't align as closely with our sets of gender expectations? So the thing I want to leave us with is that the gender binary is not like reflective of the gender ideology that has been in existence throughout time and across societies. Instead, it is just one ideology. It's a set of shared ideas within our society that guides our identities, our behaviors, and even the structure of our society, like our social institutions. But it's just one of many sets of gender ideologies. So you'll have an opportunity to explore this map, and it shows different areas around the globe and highlights some contrasting gender ideologies in those other places around the world. So I think that's a really great place to start realizing that our gender binary glasses have taught us to see gender through a specific set of cultural ideologies. But if we take those glasses off and we start to look around the world, we realize, wow, there's a lot of inconsistencies here. There's a range of ways we can make sense of and organize our ideas about gender that doesn't necessarily match the way we're doing it right now in the US. All right, so thanks for chatting with me through the gender binary thing. Please make sure you're engaging with the content on Canvas, not just the lectures, but also the interactives, additional videos, checking out the links to additional readings or articles, because they're all embedded to help support your learning and to really prepare you for assignments, assessments, papers, etc. in this class. All right, I'm going to get off my stump.